Well, the question number two. I'd like to. Question number two is this: the days of creation. A literal reading of Genesis 1 has become a symbol of faithful biblical interpretation within many circles. Some Christians have been trying to reconcile mainstream science with the Genesis account by constructing a day age reading of the text. Ben, you don't believe in the day age theory, but you also have mentioned that young earth creationists are missing the target with Genesis 1. Could you explain what's really going on in the text?
All right. Well, I don't know if I can explain it fully in a way that'll totally satisfy your audience in a short amount of time, but
I don't know.
what I
It's up to
start
you. It's up to you.
what the way that I start is dealing with this idea of I believe that when God communicates to ancient Israelites, to the biblical authors, generally speaking, he condescends to their culture. He speaks to them in their own cultural context. So to give you an example of this, like a micro example that might help you understand how we can apply this principle. If you do a search in your Bible, particularly within the Hebrew text, for the word for kidney, the Hebrew word kleot, you'll find that it's used all the time alongside like the word heart. It's most often translated in English or in other languages as mind, the word kidneys. So you'll have passages where someone will think with their kidneys, essentially.
Yes, yes.
And so, one example that I pulled up, there's probably a dozen in the text, but Psalm 26, verse 2, you have King David, and he's praying, "Oh Lord, test me, try my kidneys." And, you have people translate it as "try my heart, weigh my mind," that sort of thing. But the text literally says in the Hebrew, "Lord, judge my kidneys." So it's not just the ancient Hebrews that spoke this way. There have been articles published by medical historians showing the ancient Egyptians, for example, when they made mummies, they would make these canopic jars, and they would take the vital organs that the person needed for the afterlife, and they'd
like,
shove the kidneys in a jar and
just like the
embalm it.
movie.
Yeah, just like the movie.
Yes.
Same thing in Mesopotamia. You have this language of people thinking the idea is that kidneys are kind of the seat of consciousness shared with the heart. So what I'm getting at here is, like, if it doesn't scare you or disturb you that God would reveal this psalm to David, and he would allow him to say something like, "God, test my kidneys, search my kidneys." If that doesn't destroy your faith in the inerrance in the inspiration of the Bible, then I think what I'm about to show you, you'll be all right with that too.
So I will be right, but not many people.
Right. I don't take this assumption that whenever God speaks to an ancient Israelite, that he has to be like scientifically, technically precise. I don't take this assumption that Genesis 1, for example, contains coded astrophysics and that it's all scientifically exactly precise. I think there are very particular purposes, especially Genesis 1 is written for. It's written as a theological polemic against other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts. It's written in response to the Babylonian exile, to the fact that the Jews have been deported from their homeland, and they're theologically just terrified that it looks like this god Marduk is stronger than their God Yahweh. So when it comes to the 7 days of Genesis in particular, the question that we have to ask is what's being communicated with this idea of 7 days of creation? And to start with, virtually all scholars, I've never encountered a single Old Testament scholar that does not believe that the 7 days of creation, they refer to a temple building process. So every scholar that I've ever seen believes that Genesis 1 represents God creating the world as a cosmic temple, essentially. when you read temple building texts within other passages in the Bible, they contain one-to-one parallels with Genesis 1 with how the cosmos is set up in that text. And what we find is, so for example, when Moses is building the tabernacle, it's spread out across numerous passages, but primarily Exodus 40. The tabernacle is constructed in very clear 7 different stages that break apart naturally in the text. And then Moses ordains it within a 7-day process. When Solomon constructs his temple, this is crazy. It's 1 Kings verse 6, or not 1 Kings chapter 6. He constructs the tabernacle in 7 years. The temple was then dedicated during a 7-day festival that fell in the 7th month of that year. This is in 1 Kings chapter 8. And then Solomon gives a speech during the dedication of the temple that includes 7 petitions. And then just like in Genesis, God comes to rest in the temple, to reside in the temple, once it's finally inaugurated in this 7-stage process. So the next thing to draw attention to is the fact that this isn't just ancient Israelites that use this 7-phase building process for a temple. So, for example, in Sumerian literature, we have what are called the Gidea cylinders. They recount the building of a temple for a king, Gidea, which is inaugurated with a 7-day dedication feast for the temple. In the Ugaritic text, which I think I've been referencing these a lot already, I think that it's probably my favorite parallel. There's a Baal text where Baal is building his temple. It's in KTU 1:4. And
can you explain
essentially Baal build?
Can you explain what KTU stands for? Because this is the second time you mentioned it.
It's German. It stands for the Ugaritic alphabetic text.
Oh, okay. In German, okay. Because I never heard of it. That's why I said, oh, this is something I've never heard of. So yeah, that's the German term.
But what I'm getting at is that Baal builds his temple very clearly in 7 days. His own temple where he resides. So
interesting, because if Baal built his temple in 7 days, then Yahweh builds the whole universe or the whole earth in 7 days. So it's a much more powerful God in a sense. Eh?
Right. And Yahweh is doing this. It's extremely clear in Genesis that Yahweh is building the universe as a temple as well. So the point that I'm getting at essentially is that the 7 days of Genesis, I don't think that they're primarily intended to communicate this sort of literal scientific information about the material formation of the cosmos. Rather, what's going on is Yahweh's communicating this idea after the exile that the whole universe is his temple and he resides over all of it. It's not this case that the Jews had formerly believed that Marduk is over here and he's got this plot of land covered, and like you have some Baal, he's got this plot of land. Like that's in reality Yahweh, he's king over all of it. And even though the Judeans are now in exile in Babylon, he's still enthroned, he's still in power.
Which goes against the ancient Near Eastern and also some Roman times, that when a people is defeated, their God is also defeated.
Exactly. And if I wouldn't say this if I hadn't read the text directly, but if you read texts about Marduk, like he was taken very, very seriously by the ancient Babylonians. There are texts that come close to almost enthroning him as not quite a monotheistic god, but they attribute him titles of all the gods, and he's like this huge warrior deity that's alleged to have created the earth. So you have to keep that in mind. He's the one that created the cosmos in Babylonian cosmology. So when Judeans thought that there was no way that the temple could ever fall, because they had prophecies that said, God would never let this happen. He would never let David's dynasty collapse. And when it did, it looks like, oh, wow, Marduk is stronger than Yahweh. So this is it generated a very clear theological crisis.
Yes.
And you have all sorts of texts. You have Ezekiel, you have, in my opinion, the editing of Genesis 1 and a couple of other passages in Genesis where they're very clearly responding to this theological crisis and trying to make meaning of what's just happened historically. I don't think that they're necessarily that they care so much about velociraptors and the literal, like, how many millions of years old the Earth is. That's not. If you read Genesis 1 alongside other ancient Near Eastern creation texts, like it's very clear that's not what's going on. That's not what the author of the Bible is particularly interested in. But there are other things too. I'll leave off the question with this example. If you look at the way that Genesis 1 is ordered, so we moderns, we really freak out when we read Genesis 1 because there's so much that seems strange and almost kind of nonsensical. Trees are created before the sun.
Yes.
You have on days 1, 2, and 3, you have evening and morning. God creates light and he separates the light from the darkness, but the sun isn't created until day 4, which doesn't make any sense. So one thing that the promulgators of the framework hypothesis, I do not buy that hypothesis, but one thing that they did get correct that most Hebraic scholars do accept is that you can do this if you just get a sheet of paper and try this at home. Read through Genesis 1 and then write down the order of the creation days, like what's created, and you'll end up essentially with a table where on days 1 through 3, God he'll create a domain. So day 1, let there be light. Day 2, he creates the heavens, which separate from the ocean, the waters below. Day 3, he creates earth and plants. And then he'll fill that domain like in the exact same order on the next successive day 4, day 5, day 6. So I think there's a lot behind this the poetic structures in Genesis. Occurrences of the number 7 are extremely frequent. Like if you count up important words in the creation account, they occur in pairs of 7. Like the creation account in Genesis 1 is absolutely genius in the way that it's constructed, and in terms of its patterns, in terms of its 7 structures. So essentially, I think the creation account, the order of things that are created on the days, are essentially created in a pattern sequence. They're created for the sake of almost poetic patterning.
In Hebrew, you can pick that up, but not in English or Spanish. But in Hebrew, when it says buhu and tubuhu and yes,
which is the purpose of a good commentary. You'll pick all that up even if you don't read Hebrew. But I think for hundreds of years, Christians have been so anxious about why is the creation account, like the days are ordered so strange and all of that. Why do you have I think you have like birds created before insects and just odd things like that. And I think the reason is essentially because this is an ancient Near Eastern creation account. It follows the standards of ancient Near Eastern creation accounts. And it's ordered. The creation account is ordered not so much literally, but it's ordered in terms of a poetic structure, in terms of just so it internally coheres in a way that's symmetrical.
And also, the issue is that a lot of people think that they have to be 24 hours days or else God didn't do it. But like you said, the light was made before the sun. So how do you measure a day? That's the issue. How do you measure a day? And how is that in Scripture the day can be 1,000 years? So it's just and the thing Peter in the Psalm is just giving us an example of time, not necessarily 1,000 years. But how do you have an opinion on that?
I think an ancient Israelite would have taken the days as literal 24-hour periods, but I think it's besides the point in the text, essentially. Like just how Baal, when he creates his temple in 7 days, the text isn't talking about he created his temple actually in so many millions of years. Baal created his temple in 7 days. That's what the text says and means. But the point of the 7 days, the point of the passage is not so much focus on the days, but the theological messaging that the days communicate. And from my perspective, just like in the Bible, when God tells David, I judge your kidneys, I see the thoughts in your kidneys. The point of that passage is not to teach you about kidneys. It's not to teach you about physiology.
Because we know
It's
we
the
don't
point of
think
the
in the
passage.
kidneys. We don't think in the kidneys.
Right. That's not the point. So it doesn't bother me that you have
The
this
understanding of
sort of distribution of meaning. Correct.
no, I mean that's interesting because yes, day is used as a measuring stick just to tell us to give you is the framework. It's a framework, not actually the point, the
It's a
main point.
theological framework, an
Yes.
ancient theological framework that was standard for creation accounts. It was just part and parcel of how you do a creation account in the ancient Near East.
So in a sense, like again, I like to finish up with this, like you said about this, all the scholar that said, it's not that the Israelites or Jews, if we are going to take Genesis to be edited in the exile. I mean, I'm being more critical here, more. I want people to hear this. I mean, I want people to hear this. That it's not that. In my case, it's not that I don't believe that the oral tradition didn't start with Moses. I mean, I do, but the written text, more or less, comes from the exile. They're trying to come to grips and with what's happening to them. So the issue is that it's not that the Israelites are copying or plagiarizing other things or other cultures. It's their culture. It's their cosmology.
Right. And the cases where they do copy other cultures, I guess, it's almost always polemic. It's almost always, oh, you say this about your God, we're going to take that from you because we like it and apply it to our God. Look, he's better. That's sort of a mindset.
Like the cloud rider.
Yeah, like the Cloud Rider.
Yes, yeah, that's another one. Anyway, well, that's good. That's good. I'm just thinking